Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Bedtime Stories. I am your humble host, MacLeod the Bard, and here at Bedtime Stories, we aim to provide you, our beloved listener, with tales of old to lift your spirits throughout the day, and at night to lull you into the peaceful realm of dreams. So, whether you're looking for a pastime during your day, or for someone to bore you to sleep at night, consider me your man. With the help of my Celtic lyre, I shall now endeavor to create for you a soundscape that nourishes your imagination. And, I dare say, reaches your heart. This is Bedtime Stories on CFRU 93.3, and I'm your host, MacLeod the Bard. What is a bard? Well, I am very glad that you asked. A bard is a storyteller from ancient times, tasked with the telling of the history, law, morals, and genealogy of a people, through the use of the spoken word and musical accompaniment. To that end, I have with me my trusty Celtic lyre. To assist me with this most ancient of tasks. Nowadays, stories are more important than ever to remind us of our truest selves while we attempt to navigate this new, unmapped cyber age which we find ourselves in. Upon those unknown waters, let the work of the bard be the lighthouse that reminds you of the whispers in your heart and the memories of your dreams. I'm MacLeod the Bard, and this is Bedtime Stories on CFRU 93.3. Last week, we spent our entire hour together on one long story, Beauty and the Beast, and we had a wonderful time, didn't we? As we learned about the virtuous characters of our protagonists, and were warned of the dangers of some less virtuous characters, all while enjoying some excellent harp music, if I do say so myself. This week, I thought it would be worthwhile to go in the other direction and share a number of shorter stories with you, dear listener. Instead of one deep dive, this week we shall instead dip our toes into several different waters, and I'm sure that we will find something for everyone this night. So, get yourself comfortable, slouch a little in your seat, lean your head back a bit, get that hot cocoa ready, and reflect on these traditional tales from long, long ago. The Leprechaun's Gold. It was Lady Day, and everyone who had worked on the harvest had a holiday. The sun shone brightly, and there was a pleasant breeze. So Tom Fitzpatrick decided to go for a walk across the fields. He had been strolling for a while, when he heard a high-pitched noise, clickety-clickety-click, like the sound of a small bird chirping. Tom wondered what creature could be making this noise, so he crept quietly toward the sound. As he peered through some bushes, the noise stopped suddenly, and what did Tom see but a tiny old man, with a leather apron, sitting on a little wooden stool. Next to the old man was a large brown jar. The little man seemed to be repairing a miniature shoe, just large enough for his own feet. Tom could not believe what he saw. All the stories Tom had heard about the fantastic riches of the little people came back into his mind. "If I'm careful," he said to himself, "I've got it made." And Tom remembered that you should never take your eyes away from one of the little people. Otherwise, they disappear, of course. "Good day to you," said Tom. "Would you mind telling me what's in your jar?" "Beer, some of the best there is," said the little man. "And where did you get it from?" "I made it myself. You'll never guess what I made it from." "I suppose you made it from malt," said Tom. "Wrong," said the leprechaun. "I made it from heather." "You never did. You can't make beer from heather." "Don't you know about the Vikings? When they were here in Ireland they told my ancestors how to make beer from heather, and the secret has been in my family ever since. But you shouldn't be wasting your time asking me pointless questions. Look over there where the cows have broken into the cornfield and are trampling all over the corn." Tom started to turn around, but remembered just in time that it was a trick to make him look away from the little man. He lunged at the leprechaun, knocking over the jar of beer, and grasped the little man in his hand. Tom was angry at being tricked, and was sad to have knocked over the beer, which he had wanted to taste. But he had the creature safe in his hand. "That's enough of your tricks," shouted Tom. "Show me where you keep your gold, or I'll squeeze the life out of you before you can blink." And Tom put on such a fearsome expression that the leprechaun began to quake with fright, and to worry that Tom might truly hurt him. "So," he said to Tom, "you just carry me through the next couple of fields, and I'll show you the biggest crock of gold you could imagine." So off they went. Tom held the leprechaun tightly in his fist, so that, no matter how much he wriggled and slithered, the little man could not escape. And Tom looked straight at the tiny creature, never changing his gaze, so that the leprechaun had no chance to disappear. They walked on and on, over fields, across ditches, and through hedges. They even had to cross a crooked patch of bog, but somehow Tom managed to get through it without once looking away from the leprechaun. Finally they arrived at a field that was full of hundreds and hundreds of turnips. The leprechaun told Tom to walk toward the middle of the field, where he pointed towards a large turnip. "You just dig under that one," said the leprechaun, "and you'll find a crock full to brim with gold coins." Tom had nothing to dig with. He realized that he would have to go home and get his spade. But how would he find the right turnip when he returned? Quickly, he bent down to remove one of the red ribbons holding up his gaiters, and tied the ribbon around the turnip. "Now you swear to me," he said to the little creature, "that you won't take the ribbon from that turnip before I return." The leprechaun swore that he would not remove the ribbon, and Tom ran home to get his spade. He ran as fast as he could, because he could not wait to unearth the leprechaun's gold. By the time Tom ran back to the turnip field, he was quite breathless. But when he opened the gate into the field, he could not believe his eyes. Across the entire field a mass of red ribbons was blowing in the breeze. The leprechaun had kept his promise. He had not taken away Tom's ribbon. Instead, he had tied an identical ribbon to every single turnip in the field. Now Tom knew he would never find the leprechaun's gold. His dream of fabulous riches was over. Tom walked sulkily back home, cursing the leprechaun as he went. And every time he passed a turnip field, he gave one of the turnips a mighty wallop with his spade. This is Bedtime Stories on CFRU 93.3. The Horned Women. It happened 500 or more years ago, when all the well-to-do women learned how to prepare and card their wool and spin it to make yarn. One evening, a rich lady sat up late in her chamber, carding a new batch of wool. The rest of the family and all the servants had gone to bed, and the house was silent. Suddenly, the lady heard a loud knocking at the door, together with a loud, high-pitched voice shouting, "Open the door! Open the door!" The lady of the house, who did not recognize the voice, was puzzled. "Who is it?" she called. "I am the witch of one horn," came the reply. The lady, who could not hear very clearly through the thick oak door, thought that it was one of her neighbors who needed help, or one of the servants in a panic. So she rushed across the room and threw open the door. The lady was quite astonished to see a tall woman with a single horn growing in the middle of her head. The newcomer, who was carrying a pair of carders, strode across the room, sat down, and set to work carding some of the lady's wool. She worked in silence, but all of a sudden she looked around the room and said, "Where are all the others? They should be here by now." Straightway there was another knock on the door. Although she was by now rather frightened, the lady of the house could not stop herself from crossing the room and opening the door once more. To her surprise, another witch came into the room, this time with a pair of horns and carrying a spinning wheel. "Make room for me," she said. "I am the witch of two horns." And no sooner had she said this than she started to spin, producing fine woolen yarn faster than anyone the lady had seen before. Again and again there came knocks on the door, and again the lady felt she had to get up and let in the newcomers. This went on until there were 12 women in the room, and each had one more horn than the previous witch. They all sat around the fire, carding and spinning and weaving, and the lady of the house did not know what to do. She wanted to get up and run away, but her legs would not let her. She wanted to scream for help, but her mouth would not open. She began to realize that she was under the spell of the horned women. As she sat watching them, wondering what she could do, one of the witches called to her, "Don't just sit there. Get up and bake us all a cake." Suddenly, the lady found she could stand up. She looked around for a pot to take to the well and get some water for the cake mixture. But there was nothing that she could use. One of the hags saw her looking and said to her, "Here, take this sieve and collect some water in that." The lady knew that a sieve could not hold water, but the witch's spell made her powerless to do anything else but walk off to the well and try to fill the sieve. As the water poured through the sieve, the lady sat down and cried. Through her sobs the lady heard a voice. It seemed as if the spirit of the well was talking to her. "There is some clay and moss behind the well shaft. Take them, mix them together, and make a lining for the sieve. Then it will hold water." The lady did as she was told, and the voice spoke again. "Go back to the house, and when you come to the corner, scream 3 times and shout these words as loud as you can. 'The mountain of the Fenian women is all aflame.'" Straightway the lady's screams were echoed by the cries of the horned women. All 12 witches dashed out of the house and flew away at high speed to their mountain. Slievenamon, and the lady was released from the spell. She sighed a huge sigh of relief. But she saw quickly that the witches had made their own cake and poisoned the rest of her family. The lady turned to the well, asking the spirit, "How can I help my children and servants? And what shall I do if they return here again?" So the spirit of the well taught the lady how to protect herself if the witches should return. First, she had to sprinkle on her threshold some water in which she had washed her child's feet. Next, she was to take pieces of the witch's cake and place a piece in the mouth of each member of her household to bring them back to life. Then the spirit told her to take the cloth woven by the witches and put it into her chest. And finally, she was to place a heavy oak crossbeam across the door. The lady did all these things and waited. Soon the 12 witches returned, screaming and howling, for they had arrived at their mountain and found no fire, and were mad for vengeance. "Open the door! Open, Footwater!" they yelled, and their cries made people tremble in the next village. "I cannot open," called the water. "I am all scattered on the ground." "Open the door! Open, wooden beam!" they shouted, and their noise could be heard far over the hills. "I cannot open," said the door, "for I am fastened with a stout crossbeam." "Open the door! Open, cake that we made with our enemy's blood!" they screamed, and their screams could be heard by the sea. "I cannot open," said the cake, "for I am broken in pieces." And then the witches knew that they were defeated, and flew back to their mountain, cursing the spirit of the well as they went. The lady of the house was finally left in peace. When she went outside to see that the coast was clear, she found a cloak that one of the witches had dropped. She hung the cloak up in her room, and it was kept in her family for 500 years, in memory of her victory over the 12 Horned Women. This is Bedtime Stories on CFRU 93.3. Hudden and Dudden and Donald O'Neary. Once upon a time there were two farmers called Hudden and Dudden. They each had a huge farm, with lush pastures by the river for their herds of cows, and hillside fields for their sheep. Their beasts always brought good prices at the market, but no matter how well they did, they always wanted more. Between Hudden and Dudden's land was a little field with a tiny old cottage in the middle, and in this house lived a poor man named Donald O'Neary. Donald only had one cow, called Daisy, and barely enough grass to feed her. Although he was only poor and had but a narrow strip of farmland, Hudden and Dudden were jealous of Donald. They wanted to turf him out and divide his land between them, so that they could make their farms even bigger. And whenever the two rich farmers met up, their talk would always turn to how they could get rid of poor Donald. One day they were talking about this, and Hudden suddenly said, "Let's kill Daisy. If he has no cow, he'll soon clear out." So Hudden and Dudden crept quietly into Donald's cowshed, fed some poison to Daisy, and made off with all speed. At nightfall, Donald went to the shed to check that Daisy was comfortable. The cow turned to her master, licked his hand affectionately, collapsed onto the floor, and died. Donald was saddened at Daisy's death, but because he was a poor fellow, he had learned long ago how to cope with hardship, and he soon began to think whether he could turn his misfortune to good use. "At least I can get some money for Daisy's hide," he thought, and then he had an idea. The next day Donald marched off to the fair in the nearby town, with the hide slung over his shoulder. Before he got to the fair, he stopped in a quiet spot, made some slits in the hide, and put a penny in each of the slits. Then he chose the town's best inn, strode through the door, hung up the hide on a nail, and ordered a glass of the best whiskey. The landlord looked suspiciously at Donald's ragged clothes. Don't worry that I can't pay you, said Donald. I may look poor, but this hide gives me all the money I want. Donald walked over to the hide, hit it with a stick, and out fell a penny. The landlord was flabbergasted. What can I give you for that hide? He asked. It's not for sale, replied Donald. Me and my family have lived off that hide for years. I'm not going to sell it now. And Donald whacked the hide again, producing another penny. Eventually, after the hide had produced several more pennies, the landlord could stand it no longer. I'll give you a whole bag of gold for that hide, he shouted. Donald, who could not believe his good fortune, gave in, and the deal was struck. When Donald got home, he called on his neighbor Hudden. Would you lend me your scales? I sold a hide at the fair today and want to work out how much I can make. Hudden could not believe his eyes as Donald tipped the gold into his scales. You got all that for one hide? He asked, and as soon as Donald had gone home, he raced around to Dudden's to tell him what had happened. Dudden could not believe that poor Donald had sold Daisy's hide for a whole bagful of gold. So Hudden took his neighbor to Donald's hovel, so that he could see for himself. They walked straight into Donald's cottage without knocking on the door, and there was Donald sitting at the table, counting his gold. Good evening, Hudden. Good evening, Dudden. You thought you were so clever, playing your tricks on me, but you did me a good turn. I took Daisy's skin to the fair, where hides are fetching their weight in gold. The next day, Hudden and Dudden slaughtered all their cattle, every single cow and calf in their fine herds. They loaded the hides onto Hudden's cart and set off to the fair. When they arrived, Hudden and Dudden each took one of the largest hides and walked up and down the market square, shouting, Fine hides! Fine hides! Who'll buy our fine hides? Soon a tanner went up to Hudden and Dudden. How much are you charging for your hides? Oh, just their weight in gold. You must have been in the tavern all morning if you think I'll fall for that one, said the tanner, shaking his head. Then a cobbler came up to them. How much are you charging for your hides? Just their weight in gold. What sort of fool do you take me for? Shouted the cobbler, and landed Hudden a punch in the belly that made him stagger backward. People heard this commotion and came running from all over the fairground. One of the crowd was the innkeeper. What's going on? He shouted. A pair of villains trying to sell hides for their weight in gold, replied the cobbler. Grab them! They're probably friends of the con man who cheated me out of a bag of gold pieces yesterday, said the innkeeper. But Hudden and Dudden took to their heels. They got a few more punches, and some nips from the dogs of the town, and some tears in their clothes, but the innkeeper did not catch them, and eventually they ran all the way home. Donald O'Neary saw them coming, and could not resist laughing at them. Ah, ha, 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 ha. But Hudden and Dudden were not laughing. They were determined to punish Donald. Before the poor man knew what was happening, Hudden had grabbed a sack, and Dudden had forced Donald into it and tied up the opening. We'll carry him off to the Brown Lake and throw him in, said Dudden. But Hudden and Dudden were tired with running from the town and carrying Donald, so they stopped for a drink on the way, leaving Donald, in his sack, on the inn doorstep. Once more Donald began to think how he could gain from his problem, and he started to scream and shout inside the sack. I won't have her! I won't have her, I tell you! He repeated this on and on until a farmer, who had just arrived with a drove of cattle, took notice. What do you mean? Asked the farmer. The king's daughter! They are forcing me to marry the king's daughter, but I won't have her. The farmer thought how fine it would be to marry the king's daughter, to be dressed in velvet and jewels, and never again to get up at dawn to milk the cows. I'll swap places with you, said the farmer. You can take my herd, and I will get into the sack and be taken to marry the king's daughter. So the farmer untied the sack and let out Donald O'Neary. Don't mind the shaking, it's just the steep palace steps. And don't worry if they curse you or call you a rogue. They are angry because I have been shouting that I don't want to marry the princess, said Donald. Quickly, the farmer got into the sack, and Donald tied up the cord and drove away the herd of cattle. He was long gone when Hudden and Dudden came out of the inn and picked up their burden. Refreshed with their whiskey, they soon arrived at the lake, threw in the sack, and returned home. Hudden and Dudden could not believe their eyes when they arrived. There was Donald O'Neary, as large as life, with a large new herd of fine, fat cattle. Donald said, "There's lots of fine cattle down at the bottom of the lake. Why shouldn't I take some for myself? Come along with me and I will show you." When they got to the lake, Donald pointed to the reflection of the clouds in the water. "Don't you see the cattle?" he said. Greedy to own a rich herd like their neighbor, the two farmers dived headfirst into the waters of the lake, and they have never been seen since. This is Bedtime Stories on CFRU 93.3. Munakar and Manakar. There were once two little fellows called Munakar and Manakar. They liked to pick raspberries, but Manakar always ate them all. Munakar got so fed up with this that he said he would look for a rod to make a gibbet to hang Manakar. Soon Munakar came to a rod. "What do you want?" said the rod. "A rod to make a gibbet," replied Munakar. "You won't get me," said the rod, "unless you can get an axe to cut me." So Munakar went to find an axe. "What do you want?" said the axe. "I am looking for an axe to cut a rod to make a gibbet," replied Munakar. "You won't get me," said the axe, "unless you can get a stone to sharpen me." So Munakar went to find a stone. "What do you want?" said the stone. "I am looking for a stone to sharpen an axe, to cut a rod, to make a gibbet," replied Munakar. "You won't get me," said the stone, "unless you can get water to wet me." So Munakar went to find water. "What do you want?" said the water. "I am looking for water to wet a stone, to sharpen an axe, to cut a rod, to make a gibbet," replied Munakar. "You won't get me," said the water, "unless you can get a deer who will swim me." So Munakar went to look for a deer. "What do you want?" said the deer. "I am looking for a deer to swim some water, to wet a stone, to sharpen an axe, to cut a rod, to make a gibbet," replied Munakar. "You won't get me," said the deer, "unless you can get a hound who will hunt me." So Munakar went to look for a hound. "What do you want?" said the hound. "I am looking for a hound to hunt a deer, to swim some water, to wet a stone, to sharpen an axe, to cut a rod, to make a gibbet," replied Munakar. "You won't get me," said the hound, "unless you can get some butter to put in my claw." So Munakar went to look for some butter. "What do you want?" said the butter. "I am looking for some butter to put in the claw of a hound, to hunt a deer, to swim some water, to wet a stone, to sharpen an axe, to cut a rod, to make a gibbet," replied Munakar. "You won't get me," said the butter, "unless you can get a cat who can scrape me." So Munakar went to look for a cat. "What do you want?" said the cat. "I am looking for a cat to scrape some butter, to put in the claw of a hound, to hunt a deer, to swim some water, to whet a stone, to sharpen an axe, to cut a rod, to make a gibbet," replied Munachar. "You won't get me," said the cat, "unless you can get some milk to feed me." So Munachar went to get some milk. "What do you want?" said the milk. "I am looking for some milk, to feed a cat, to scrape some butter, to put in the claw of a hound, to hunt a deer, to swim to some water, to get wet stone, to sharpen an axe, to cut a rod, to make a gibbet," replied Munachar. "You won't get me," said the milk, "unless you can bring me some straw from those threshers over there." So Munachar went to ask the threshers. "What do you want?" said the threshers. "I am looking for some straw to give to the milk, to feed a cat, to scrape some butter, to put in the claw of a hound, to hunt a deer, to swim some water, to wet a stone, to sharpen an axe, to cut a rod, to make a gibbet," replied Munachar. "You won't get any straw," said the threshers, "unless you bring some flour to bake a cake from the miller next door." So Munachar went to ask the miller. "What do you want?" said the miller. "I am looking for some flour to bake a cake, to give to the threshers, to get some straw, to give to the milk, to feed a cat, to scrape some butter, to put in the claw of a hound, to hunt a deer, to swim some water, to wet a stone, to sharpen an axe, to cut a rod, to make a gibbet," replied Munachar. "You'll get no flour," said the miller, "unless you fill this sieve with water." Some crows flew over crying, "Daub! Daub!" So Munachar daubed some clay on the sieve so it would hold water. And he took the water to the miller, who gave him flour. He gave the flour to the threshers, who gave him straw. He took the straw to the cow, who gave him some milk. He took the milk to the cat, who scraped some butter. He gave the butter to the hound, who hunted the deer. The deer swam the water wet the stone sharpened the axe cut the rod, and rod made a gibbet. And when Munachar was ready to hang Manachar, he found that Manachar had burst. This is Bedtime Stories on CFRU 93.3. King O'Toole and His Goose. Many years ago lived a king called O'Toole. He was a great king with a large and prosperous kingdom, and he loved to ride the length and breadth of his realm, through the woods and across the fields, hunting deer. But as time went by, the king grew old and infirm, and he could no longer ride or hunt. He became sad and bored, and did not know what to do. Then one day he saw a flock of geese flying across the sky. O'Toole admired the birds' graceful flight, and decided that he would buy his own goose to amuse himself. The king loved to watch the goose flying around his lake, and every Friday the bird dived into the water and caught a trout for O'Toole to eat. The graceful flight of the goose and the tasty fish she caught made O'Toole happy. But one day the goose grew old like her master, and could no longer amuse the king or catch fish for him. Once more O'Toole became sad, and even thought of drowning himself in his own lake. Then O'Toole was out walking, and he saw a young man he had not met before. "God save you, King O'Toole," said the young man. "Good day to you," said the king. "I am King O'Toole, ruler of these parts. But how did you know my name?" "Oh, never mind," said Saint Kavin, for it was he. "I know more than that. How is your goose today?" But however did you know about my goose? Said the king. Oh, never mind. I must have heard about it somewhere. King O'Toole was fascinated that a total stranger should know so much about him, so he started to talk with the young man. Eventually, O'Toole asked Cavan what he did for a living. I make old things as good as new, said Cavan. So are you some sort of tinker or magician? Asked O'Toole. No, my trade is better than those. What would you think if I made your old goose as good as new? At this, the king's eyes nearly popped out of his head. He whistled loudly, and the goose came waddling slowly up to her master. It seemed impossible that the young man would be able to restore the crippled creature to health. Cavan looked at the goose. I can help her, he said, but I don't work for nothing. What will you give me if I can make her fly again? The king looked around him, thinking of the great lands and riches of his kingdom, and looked at the poor old goose. He wanted nothing more in the world than to see this creature hale and hearty once more. Even his kingdom seemed paltry by comparison. I will give you anything that you ask for, replied King O'Toole. That's the way to do business. Will you give me all the land that the goose flies over on her first flight after I make her better? I will, said the king. Then it's a bargain, said Saint Kavin. And with that, the saint beckoned, and the goose waddled heavily towards him, and looked up to his face, as if she was asking him what he would do next. Saint Kavin picked up the goose by her two wings, and made the sign of the cross on her back. Then he threw her into the air, saying, "Whoosh!" as if he was producing a gust of wind to help her up into the sky. As soon as Kavin had thrown her up, the goose soared up into the air, beat her wings gently, and was flying high and fast, just as she had when the king first saw her. King O'Toole could not believe his eyes. He stared up into the sky with his mouth open in amazement, his eyes following every beat of the goose's wings and every turn of her flight. She seemed to be flying further and higher and more gracefully than ever before. Then the goose made a final turn and swooped down, to land at the king's feet, where he patted her gently on the head. "And what do you say to me," said Saint Kavin, "for making her fly again?" "It goes to show that nothing beats the art of man," said O'Toole. "Anything else?" said Kavin. "And that I am beholden to you." "But remember your promise," went on Kavin. "Will you give me every patch of ground, every field and every forest that she has flown over on her first flight?" King O'Toole paused and looked at the young man. "Yes, I will," he said, "even though she has flown over every acre of my kingdom, even if I lose all my lands." "That is well spoken, King O'Toole," said the young man, "for your goose would not have flown again if you had gone back on your word." So the king showed the young man all the lands of which he was now master. He called his scribes to draw up documents to prove that the kingdom had been passed from one man to the other, and so it was that Saint Kavin made himself known at last to King O'Toole. "I am Saint Kavin in disguise. I have done all this to test you, and you have not failed the test. You have done well, King O'Toole, and I will support you and give you food, drink, and somewhere to live now that you have given up your kingdom." "Do you mean all this time I have been talking to the greatest of the saints, while I just took you for a young lad?" said the flabbergasted O'Toole. "You know the difference now," replied Kavin. And Kavin was good as his word, and looked after O'Toole in his old age. But neither the king nor the goose lived long. The goose was killed by an eel when she was diving for trout, and the old king perished soon afterwards. He refused to eat his dead goose, for he said that he would not eat what Saint Kavin had touched with his holy hands. This is Bedtime Stories on CFRU 93.3. The Story of Deirdre. Long ago in Ireland lived a man by the name of Malcolm Harper. He was a good man, with a wife and a house and lands of his own, but no family. One day a soothsayer called on Malcolm, and when Malcolm found out that his visitor could see into the future, he asked if the soothsayer could foretell what the future held in store for him. The soothsayer paused, went out of the house for a few minutes to collect his thoughts and look into the future, and returned to face Malcolm. "When I looked into the future, I saw that you will have a daughter who will bring great trouble to many men in Ireland. Much blood will be spilled on her account, and 3 of the country's bravest heroes will lose their lives because of her." A few years later a fine daughter was born to Malcolm's wife, and they called the girl Deirdre. Malcolm and his wife were afraid of the trouble she might bring them, so they decided to find a foster mother who would agree to keep Deirdre away from the sight of men. When they found a suitable foster mother, they went to a far country and raised a mound of earth and built inside a house which could hardly be seen from outside. And there Deirdre and her foster mother lived, unknown to the world, until the girl was 16 years of age. The foster mother passed on all her knowledge to Deirdre, so soon the girl could sew and spin and cook, and knew all about the plants and flowers that grew around their hidden home. Then, one foul night, a hunter passed the mound where Deirdre lived. He had lost the scent of his quarry, and found himself far away from his companions. Tired and lost, he settled down by the side of the grassy hillock to rest, and soon, with his tiredness and the oncoming dark, he fell into a deep sleep. As he slept, the hunter dreamed that he had come upon a place where the fairies lived. It seemed that he could hear the little creatures playing their music, and he began to shout out loud, "Let me in! I am a hunter far from home, and I need warmth and shelter." Snug inside her house, Deirdre heard the huntsman's cry. "What noise is that? It sounds as if some poor creature needs our help." Deirdre's foster mother realized what they had heard, and tried to keep her ward away from the man outside. "Just some bird or beast leaving for its mate," she replied. "Leave well alone, and it will disappear into the woods." But Deirdre had heard the hunter asking to be let in, and, kind-hearted as she was, she would not turn away a creature in peril. "Foster mother, you have taught me to be kind and considerate to others. I will let the poor creature in and give it shelter." And Deirdre unbolted the door to their house and let the hunter come in. When the hunter saw Deirdre, he realized that there were many men at King Connachar's court who would be overwhelmed by her beauty. He mentioned especially the great hero, Naos, son of Usnech, who would be glad of such a wife. Although Deirdre's foster mother tried to persuade the hunter to tell no one about the girl, he would make no such promise, and soon left, heading towards the royal palace. As soon as he arrived at the court, he asked leave to speak to the king. "What is it you want?" asked Connachar. "I came to tell you about the fairest woman I ever saw," replied the hunter. "Surely she must be the most beautiful in all of Ireland." The king questioned the hunter about Deirdre, and promised him rich rewards if he would tell the king how to find her dwelling place. Then King Connachar called for his kinsmen, and they rode off to find the place where Deirdre lived. When the king knocked at the door, the foster mother, little thinking who it was, called out that she would only open if the king commanded her. "This is King Connachar himself," he called, and they could do nothing but obey his command and open the door. As soon as Connachar saw Deirdre, he wanted to carry her away and marry her forthwith. But Deirdre hesitated, asking the king to wait for a year and a day before their marriage. Connachar said he would wait, so long as she promised solemnly that she would marry him at the end of that time. Deirdre promised, and Connachar took her to his palace, where there were ladies in waiting to look after her every wish. One day Deirdre was out walking with her ladies, when a group of men came past. When she saw them, Deirdre was struck with their handsome appearance, and thought that they must be Naus, son of Usnech, and his two brothers. Deirdre could not take her eyes from Naus as he passed, and realized that she was falling in love with the young lord. Suddenly, she gathered her gown about her and began to run after the young men, leaving her ladies-in-waiting behind. "Naus, son of Usnech," she called, "will you leave me behind?" When he heard Deirdre calling, Naus turned back, saw the girl, and was smitten with love himself. Swiftly, he decided to take the girl with him, and they rode away together, Naus's brothers with them, never stopping until they reached Scotland. Naus and his brothers Allen and Arden lived in their tower, and Deirdre was happy with them. Until the time came when Deirdre had promised to marry Connachar. The king began to think how he might get Deirdre back, and he decided on this plan. He would hold a great feast, inviting all the lords from his kingdom and thereabouts, including Naus and his brothers, and Connachar sent his uncle, Ferchar mac Ro, together with Ferchar's 3 sons, to Scotland, to invite Naus. Deirdre was worried when she heard Ferchar tell Naus about the king's invitation. "Do not go," she begged. "It is a trick. I had a dream in which I saw 3 hawks coming to Scotland and hovering above your tower. Their beaks were stained with red blood. They were coming for you." But Naus insisted. "It will be bad luck for us if we do not accept the king's invitation," he said, and Ferchar mac Ro agreed, saying, "If the king is kind to you, be kind to him in return. But if he is violent towards you, treat him in the same way. I and my 3 strong sons will stand by you." So Ferchar and his sons returned with Naus and his brothers, and although she was unwilling, and wept and trembled with fear, Deirdre went with them. Once they had arrived at the palace of Connachar, Ferchar sent a message that he was back, and that Naus, Allen, Arden, and Deirdre were with him. Connachar was surprised, since he had thought that Naus would not have dared return. Because he was not yet ready to receive his guests, Connachar asked his servants to show them to a small house he kept for visitors, some way from the palace. Connachar grew impatient and anxious about Deirdre, so he sent his kinsman Gelban Grednach down to the house to see how they fared. "Tell me whether Deirdre looks well, and whether she is still as beautiful as she was," he ordered. Gelban crept down to the house and looked in at the spy-hole in the door. There was Deirdre, together with Naus and his brothers, who were playing dice. Deirdre blushed, as she always did when someone looked at her, and Naus noticed her reddening face at once. Naus, maddened that someone should be spying on Deirdre, grabbed one of the dice and hurled it straight at the spy-hole. Gelban reeled back in pain. The dice had taken out his eye. He scrambled back to the king, his hand clasped to his bleeding face. Gelban told the king what had happened, adding that Deirdre was so beautiful he almost risked losing the sight in his other eye. Connachar realized that he should lose no time, if Naus would ruin the sight of any man who even looked at Deirdre. So straightway he gathered together his 300 bravest men, and they vowed to take Deirdre and kill her captors. When Connachar and his men arrived, Ferchar's son came to the aid of Naus, as they had promised. Never before was there such a fearsome sight, as the sons of Ferchar fought all comers, slashing left and right with their swords, and killing every one of Connachar's men. The king could hardly control his wrath as Naus, his brothers, and Deirdre made their escape, and the sons of Ferchar left to tell their father all about their great deeds of heroism. Connachar had almost given up hope when he remembered his best magician, Duanan Gacha Druid. "You are supposed to be the most powerful magician in Ireland," the king said. "I have spent sacks of gold on books of spells for you and on ingredients for your magic potions, yet still my enemies escape from me. What can you do?" "I will find a way to stop them," replied the wizard, lifting up his arms and pointing toward the middle distance. Suddenly a vast, dense forest appeared, with trees, briars, and underbrush blocking the way of the sons of Uisnech. But Naus and Allen and Arden hacked their way through the middle of the trees, and Deirdre followed, holding Naus's hand. "It's hopeless," said Connachar. "They can get through the trees with hardly a moment's hesitation. Surely we are powerless to stop them from escaping." "Then I will find another way to stop them," proclaimed the magician, lifting his arms once more. This time, instead of a grass-covered plain in front of the sons of Uisnech, there was a grey sea. But Naus and Allen and Arden took off their outer clothes, and each man tied them into a bundle on his back. Naus lifted Deirdre and put her on his shoulders. Then the three men began to wade steadily through the great sea, walking further and further away from Connachar. "They're still getting away," moaned the king. "Have you no other powers to stop them in their tracks?" "I have yet one more way to stop them," cried the wizard, gesturing with his arms yet again, and no sooner had the druid raised his arms than the sea began to freeze. Each wave was as sharp as a sword on one side, and the other side was coated with deadly poison. It seemed that no living thing would be able to pass through. Arden was the first to be overcome. Naus lifted him above the frozen waves, but Arden was already dying. Soon Allen too was feeling faint, and perished before Naus could do anything to help him. When he saw his two beloved brothers dead beside him, Naus too gave up hope. With his brothers gone, he little cared whether he was alive or dead, and soon he was overcome by the deadly frozen sea. "All the sons of Uisnech are gone," said the druid. "You may take your rightful wife." But hard as he looked, Connachar could no longer see Deirdre. "Take away the frozen wave so that I can see if she still lives," commanded the king. The druid's magic took away the sea, and there was the green plain once more. In the center were the three dead sons of Uisnech, and by their side was Deirdre, her head bowed in mourning for the death of Naus, the man she truly loved. Connachar ordered graves to be dug for the three brothers, and Deirdre followed them, still sorrowing, to the burial place. When she arrived, she told the grave diggers to make the grave larger and wider, until she jumped into the grave beside the body of Naus, and died by his side. The king told his men to take her body out of the grave and buried it well away, on the opposite shore of the loch. But as time went by, a fir tree grew above the grave of Naus, and another over Deirdre's grave. Slowly, the two trees grew together until their branches met above the loch's waters. Connachar did not like to be reminded of the love of Naus and Deirdre, so ordered the branches to be cut. Again the branches grew, and again they were removed. But the time came when Connachar took a new wife, and she told him to let the branches grow over the waters as they should, and to leave the dead to lie in peace. So ends our time together this evening, beloved listener. I thank you for sharing your ears and opening your heart to the wisdom of times past, and I hope you were able to gain some newfound wisdom of your own. Until next time, may your dreams be sweet. I'm McLeod the Bard, and this was Bedtime Stories on CFRU 93.3.